2023 FIDE World Cup. It's the premier knockout tournament in over-the-board chess. All of these players have one goal: to become a candidate for the World Championship. Only 3 players in each tournament will earn this distinction. The winners will also earn a favorite in pretty much any tournament he plays.
And Magnus Carlsen seals the deal with a draw. He makes it to the finals of the FIDE World Cup for the first time ever. 18-year-old Pragnananda advances to the finals to fight against Magnus Carlsen for the FIDE World Cup.
What a final that's going to be.
This is the 2023 FIDE World Cup.
2023 FIDE World Cup from Baku, Azerbaijan. A look there at the playing hall and the big ticking clock, which tells you everything you need to know. In exactly 8 minutes and 30 seconds, Magnus Carlsen and Pragnananda will contest the rapid and potentially blitz tiebreaks, which will determine the sole winner of the 2023 FIDE World Cup. It has been an event lasting over a month. It has been a grueling event, an epic event. Shall remain when today is complete. I'm your host, Grandmaster Daniel Naroditsky, and once again, alongside Grandmaster Peter Leko. Peter, these 8 minutes, I can't wait for them to pass because this is going to be something else.
Hello, Daniel. Hello, everyone. Yes, this is gonna be the day. It's unbelievable what we have witnessed throughout the World Cup. I feel like it's just building up, and today we're gonna witness this sensational rapid tiebreak between these two extraordinary gentlemen.
Studio. Obviously, yesterday was a disappointing day to some. Magnus Carlsen, he hasn't been feeling well. He's been struggling with the after effects of food poisoning, and with the white pieces yesterday, forcing a bailout, playing the 4 Knights variation, forcing an endgame, and making a draw in under 2 hours. But the silver lining is that we will, in fact, get draws they start by making. Eventually, a winner will be determined. It might take a bunch of blitz games, but we will see a winner at the end of the day. The format is pretty simple. They begin with a set of 2 rapid games, the time control, 25 minutes with 10-second increment per move. If this mini-match ends in a 1-1 tie, either 2 draws or 1 victory for each side, they move on to the second tie-break set. The time control moves down to 10 minutes per side with, once again, a 10-second increment per move. If this second tie-break mini-match ends in a draw, we get to the blitz portion of the tie-breaks. The time control moves down to 5+3. And if that third set is also tied, they move on to the sudden death portion. And we have had, in the Svane Wang Hao match already, as well as other matches, I think, a sudden death game. They play as many blitz games as required until a decisive result is reached with a time control of 3 minutes and 2 seconds per move. But we will cross that bridge if we get there. First and foremost, their feet held to the fire when it comes to forcing them to perform extremely well in the rapid portion.
Yes, this is the ultimate challenge with all this changing time control, 25 minutes, first of all, jumping from the classical portion to 25 minutes, then eventually jumping to 10 minutes plus 10 seconds segment, which will be a completely different battle, much more speed at hand, and then potentially the blitz. Insane action. I'm really hoping that we're going to have a very long and exciting tiebreak. That's what we are hoping for. Both of these are going to be an epic battle between these two.
There's incredible narratives that surround both of these players. Obviously, for Magnus Carlsen, he has never won a World Cup. This is the one feather in his cap that he has coveted for so long. Someone has knocked him out, whether in the early World Cup runs or Jan Krzysztof Duda in the previous World Cup. He has never won this tournament. And for Magnus Carlsen, this means so much. For Pragnananda, the Indian phenom who has burst onto the Super Grandmaster scene, crossing 2,700 for the first time in this tournament and reaching all the way to the zillions, the all-around amazing play that Prag has shown has delighted his fans, of course, in his beautiful hometown of Chennai, his family, and all of the hundreds of thousands of fans across the world who are watching this new crop of Indian talents take the chess world by storm. Who will prevail? Well, that remains to be seen. And Peter, we should not forget that there is also a third place tiebreaker going on, and we should congratulate Fabiano Caruana for an amazing performance yesterday as he forces that tiebreaker with an on-demand victory over Nijat.
Yeah, that was a great comeback yesterday. A very important win for Fabi. I'm super happy for him that he's able to show why we are such a big fan of Fabiano Caruana, brilliant player. He bounced back, and there also we're going to see a very big battle. However, clearly our main attention, main focus will be on the final match between Praggnanandhaa and Magnus Carlsen.
On the highest rated chess player in history, the longtime world champion, and the Indian talent who turned 18 during this tournament. The nerves cannot be overstated, Peter. Really, it's hard to make an exaggeration because this is the final day. This is when everything comes to a head. I mean, what is going on through the players' minds right now as we have 3 minutes before the start of the round?
A lot, definitely a lot goes through around their heads. First of all, they have to get ready for quite a lot of portions. Yeah, it's not just preparing for one game. Also, you have to kind of next section, the 10 minutes rapid. Then do I have a chance to jump to some other opening, some different direction? Do I have some opening surprises ready for a faster time control? There are so many questions. I completely believe that you can't go into this tiebreak thinking like I'm going to do exactly the same in the 25-minute section, then in the 10-minute section, and also in the blitz. You have to adjust your playing style.
That's a great point, Peter. And those thoughts were going through my mind as I was considering the match strategy that Pragg and Carlsen are going to adopt. And this match strategy is going to take inspiration from all of the rapid tiebreaks that they have already played. For Praggnanandhaa, he defeated Hikaru Nakamura in their first rapid play game. He defeated his compatriot Arjun Erigaisi in a nail-biter where he had to win several games on demand across several time controls. How important, Peter, confidence that they need to perform at this highest level?
Exactly. This is the key, the confidence. It's clear that Magnus Carlsen has tremendous confidence. He has basically won every single tiebreak he had been into all his life, being maybe the exception against Dingley once in the Singfield Cup. But yes, that's only one from, I don't know, a bunch, at least 20. So yes, Magnus definitely has this feeling. On the other hand, their rapid encounter is 7 wins for Magnus and 3 wins for Praggnanandhaa. And I believe that here the narrative of talking about that 3 wins for Pragg, that's very, very important. He knows exactly that I have already beaten Magnus. I can do that. This will give tremendous confidence for Pragg.
We see the handshake there in our third place matchup. Fabiano Caruana will have the black pieces against Nijat Abbasov in their first rapid game. Praggnanandhaa has already sat down at the board. Carlsen has been in the habit of arriving with only a couple of seconds left. He will have to be on time because the time control is reduced, and indeed he is on time. Carlsen will have black, sits down with his customary 2 bottles of water, white pieces in game 1. Pragg will have to put some pressure on Magnus Carlsen and set a strong tone.
Yeah, setting a tone is very important. Then automatically your opponent will also feel that I have to do something with my white pieces as well. The handshake is there.
Let's go. Or not. There we go.
E4. And now it is Magnus's turn to shadow his pieces.
And that was 3 bottles of water. My counting skills not up to par this early in the morning. And Carlsen responds, much like yesterday's game, with colors reversed with e5. And something tells me that Pragg will not be essaying the 4 knights defense in this game.
It will be the Italian. I'm pretty sure that Pragg was for the Italian. Exactly. Bishop c4 on the board.
Knight f6. And, of course, the fried liver with knight g5 has fallen out of fashion. Pragg going main line with d3.
Yes, and now a4 immediately. Okay. This is a slight surprise. Usually white plays c3 or short castle first. And the main point is, I believe, pretty clear. Try to surpass. He hasn't expected the move A4 to happen so early.
And A4 has been essentially the sine qua non of how top GMs have played the Italian recently. This move appears in almost every Italian game, but it usually appears much later, Peter. I think this is what you're saying. It usually appears after white has played C3 and often developed the knight from B1. So A4 as early as move 5, it's not unheard of. What is the idea other than the pure surprise value of delaying the move C3? Is Magnus responding in very conventional fashion there with D6? Is Prague going to put a knight on C3 potentially? Somehow, I'm skeptical about that.
Yes, I think that the whole point was of A4 to try to provoke black of deciding already of going A6 or A, simply to stay flexible, not show your cards yet. And after D6 short castle, yeah, Prague says, yes, I'm not interested yet on advancing my A pawn. It was just a slight teaser.
Life breathed into the Italian, which is one of the oldest, if not the oldest opening in modern chess. It has been played regularly at the top level since the 1600s. But in the old days, both sides would automatically castle kingside. In the old days, white would play C3 followed by D4. But recently, we've seen a crop of games where black tries to go H6 and G5 and actually delays castling kingside, instead going for the quick attack on white's kingside. But often, Peter, that attack is a lot stronger when white already has a pawn on H3, because that pawn acts as a hook for black's G pawn once it reaches G4. In this particular version, H6 followed by G5 just doesn't seem to be congruent with what Magnus wants out of this game, which I think is a solid setup with the black pieces.
For sure. Yes, the question is, on the other hand, that what is his move? Does he spend the tempo? Another question that if, and Magnus goes A5, yeah, I wanted to highlight that if he is not pushing his A pawn, he goes for castles, then he has to be confronted with bishop G5. So Magnus decides to stay flexible, and after A5, Prague immediately blitzes out the move bishop C1 to E3. That was his idea against black's A5 setup.
That's a big move. Of course, the bishop could come out to G5. Instead, it comes out to E3, offering an exchange. And this is a very thematic exchange in the Italian. If black trades, what does white get in return? Well, the downside is clear. White gets the doubled pawns. But in return, white gets pressure down the F-file. The rook on F1 is going to be very happy, combining with the bishop on C4. And in some situations, of course, the knight from F3 could jump either to G5, but more commonly from H4, it seeks a nice post on F5. Black, of course, can do the same thing. Black can respond with bishop E6, but white is under no obligation to exchange the bishops in the same manner, and white can play the move knight B1 to D2, keeping the tension. We actually might see all of these moves on the board. Carlsen has exchanged, but instead of bishop E6, he has castled kingside right into the teeth of white's.
It's somewhat surprising for me, yeah. Magnus, so let's just go slowly. Magnus captures on E3, F takes E3, castles. I wanted to give a kind of explanation that maybe the reason why Prague has not played the standard C2, C3 is that he might want to develop his knight to C3. However, he goes for the conventional knight B2. Magnus blitzes out the back square for black's knight, also making sure that all the ideas with knight H4 won't be so dangerous. And black is also setting up some C6, D5 ideas, trying to block that bishop on C4. Now the big question, however, if you know that Magnus wants to play knight G6, stopping knight H4, then there is the question, why aren't we able to do that immediately?
So knight H4 in this position, jump on the opportunity train, because once the knight reaches G6, I mean, you can play queen E1 followed by knight H4, but it won't come with the same effect. If you play knight H4 here, what I like about that move is knight G6, of course, can be met with knight to F5. And obviously, which means that white's control over the A2, G8 diagonal is now uncontested and can only be contested by the C65 idea. So without the bishop, black often struggles to maintain the same level of control in the center. I think that knight h4 might be Prague's most testing response. I'm with you.
Yes, somehow also it fits perfectly to White's previous play. He has already doubled his pawns with the clear idea of trying to grab the initiative with knight h4. He knows exactly that give black a couple of moves, knight g6, c6, d5, and black will be the one fighting for the center and also for the upper hand. Then White's pawn structure will suddenly tell. White has to be energetic and knight h4 on the board.
And Magnus immediately responding with c7, c6, the idea that we have talked about here at length, preparing d5, in some situations preparing to deploy the queen to b6 and attacking that e3 pawn, which could become vulnerable later on in the middle game, and would lead to a very unfavorable exchange for White because it would relinquish White's control over the center and allow black to push d5 and establish ideal control over the center. White's attack, in the meantime, White's fledgling attack, would go absolutely nowhere with that pawn on f5 blocking White's control over the f-file. This is out of the question.
Yes, one thing that, however, we have to address, the typical exchange sacrifice, rook takes f6, and Magnus is kind of provoking it. That gives me the feeling that clearly he anticipates the move. He feels like in this exact position, I don't have to fear it. But since Prague is now pausing, I believe we should be talking about this exchange sacrifice. Rook takes f6, g takes f6, queen h5. Usually this is the way. Black plays the move d5, White falls back with the bishop to b3. And long terms, there is very serious idea with rook f1 going after black's king. But Prague has felt like, no, Magnus is trying to provoke me for it. Probably White is not yet ready, and he plays according to the demands of the position. He goes for...
It likely will remain on e7 for the time being. This is the whole crux of Magnus's strategy. If you rush the move knight g6, we've already been down that rabbit hole. White plays knight f5 and achieves the kind of ideal setup on the king side. Prague is aiming directly for g3. Once the queen reaches g3, rook takes f6 will be a direct threat. Black's king could slide over to h8, but Prague is not trying to do anything fast. He is accumulating his pieces on the king side. That is the first phase of any attack. You need to actually get your pieces to the right area of the board. Nothing in the Italian happens within 2 or 3 moves. This is a gradual process. And a big question, Peter, is whether and when Magnus will push d5, because the drawback of the move d5 is obvious. It weakens the e5 pawn, and queen g3 potentially will come with even greater effect.
Yes, queen e1 is a very nice little touch. I also somehow remember that both reinforcing the idea of going queen g3. In certain situations, it's kind of nice to control the g4 square. But for the moment, it is Magnus who has to think about how to handle the position. I'm loving the choice of Prague for the fact that Magnus has tremendous experience in the Italian in different structures. But exactly this very specific one, that White has kept the pawn on c2, and White was
a monumental job this tournament of sensing in which type of position his opponent will feel most comfortable, most uncomfortable. And when you're talking about players like Hikaru Nakamura and Magnus Carlsen, that is very, very hard to do. Against Hikaru, he responded to the move once c4 with a principled e5. Against Magnus, in their first classical game, Pragnananda played the English opening himself, and he did manage to put serious pressure on Magnus Carlsen's choice of setup. Now he decides to opt for e4, and an opening that he himself is more comfortable with and more experienced with. Not only objective advantage, but also to get a position that you feel comfortable with, like putting on, an old pair of jeans. You know what to expect. And I really like Prague's opening choice. He's built up a little advantage on the clock as well. And a big decision here coming up for Magnus.
It's clear that his last 2 moves, knight e7, c6, had one clear. He hasn't been blitzing out the move d5. While we are waiting for Magnus to make up his mind, we can maybe just quickly check what happens after d5, bishop b3. So White falls back with the bishop. We already mentioned that, yes, White will come with queen g3. targeting that pawn on e5, using the pin on the g file against the king of going for rook takes f6 ideas as well. And the most natural developing move, bishop e6, might run into queen g3 with this double attack when black might be forced to move away that knight from f6 to d7. Certainly something which you don't want to do.
And white can continue to accumulate his pieces with moves like rook a to e1. And and behold, we do have d5, bishop b3 on the board. But Carlsen responding with queen to d6, occupying the square that was left vacant by black's previous move. The queen moves up in order to protect the knight laterally and to protect the e5 pawn. It's a very logical move on the surface. But the drawback, Peter, is that after queen to g3, as we see Pragg leaning over the board, I think he might be sensing that this is an opportunity to grab the initiative. Queen g3 poses serious threats against black's queen, which is undefended. And that idea I pointed out a little bit earlier, d3, d4, turns from an abstract concrete threat.
Wow. Yes, this is very interesting. So after queen g3, black has to deal with the situation. Let's just one time try the most natural move, knight g6. White has even different options. Knight f5, even in this construction, maybe knight takes g6 is also possible. Let me just highlight this transformation of structure. That pawn, black has to go rook e8, and white follows it up with knight g5, followed by queen h4, and suddenly rook takes f6, queen h7, check ideas are coming. Super dangerous stuff.
And it all starts with queen g3, that queen supervising the other pieces and aiming at the e5 pawn. Is it fair to say that should Pragg play the natural queen g3, which I'm expecting he will, that Magnus is, again, trouble is a very strong word. And, you know, Magnus Carlsen is not often in trouble. But let's put it this way. His position seems quite a bit more uncomfortable after queen g3.
He doesn't have natural moves, and the computer actually highlights that knight h5 might be the best. It's a very strange little move because after queen g5, black actually has to fall back with the knight to f6. One doesn't get the feeling like you can afford to lose this extra tempo. And Magnus, in full concentration mode, he feels that this is a very critical position.
What's going down through Pragg's head right now? He obviously sees the move queen g3. Could he be asked to have something up his sleeve? Because we have the luxury of seeing the computer assessment, of seeing the top move. Pragg is sitting there, and he's thinking, there's no way that queen g3 is as good as it looks. Well, it actually is as good as it looks. And Pragg, he's been trusting himself all tournament, right? He has been believing in his own ability to approach every position in a better and superior way than...
I believe he will. First of all, I also don't really see any other move for white. Yeah, it's kind of the absolute logical follow-up. He has played the move knight h4. He has played the move queen d1 to e1 with a clear intention of going with his queen to g3. Is he bothered by this knight h5? I don't think that it's such a... Yeah, and it's on the board.
He's played it. And if knight h5, followed by retracting the knight back to f6, is the best that black can do, well, that is a pretty bad sign for Carlsen, because doing that in any position is difficult. That is admitting that the situation is undesirable for you, that you are essentially groveling for a draw, and that you are at the mercy of your opponent, who can choose to repeat the position. Of course, I think there's no way that Pragg would repeat if Magnus does, in fact, play knight h5 and knight f6. But could Carlsen play a calmer move like rook f8 to e8, just trying to solidify?
That move looks very shaky. I guess that rook e8 with the vulnerable f7 pawn, the bishop on b3, rook on f1, beautifully eyeing. I'm not seeing black going for a move like this.
I agree. It doesn't seem to do anything specific. Maybe rook to d8 in order to protect the queen and try to take this thing out of d4. Here, you're highlighting e takes d5 and e4, carving open the a2 g8 diagonal. And obviously, if black plays d4, everything collapses. The knight from d2 jumps into c4 and wins the e5 pawn. And man, I mean, this is how close the situation is from becoming absolutely critical. It seems like whichever Peter, you're leaving something else exposed. If you move the rook, you leave f7. If you move the bishop from c8, then you're not addressing the pin along the h2 b8 diagonal. This is very problematic for Magnus.
Very, and we see Magnus immediately in super concentrating mood. He knows exactly that he can't afford one inaccuracy. The reason why it's so unpleasant for him at the moment that he has played only the most natural moves, so you can't really understand while playing the game that what went wrong. One could argue that maybe against this setup then the move knight e7 followed by c6 was too ambitious, but a natural way. So after queen g3 now, I'm pretty sure that Magnus will have, but probably I have to play it. Let's just quickly check this. Knight h5, queen g5. So the black knight has to fall back. Now the problem for white is it's not so easy to follow it up with a direct idea. Black also has this idea of kicking the queen away with h6, and once the queen falls back to g3, then again keep on harassing that queen. You just have to somehow unbalance the situation. You can't tolerate that queen on g3 for too long.
Well, d4 definitely has to be calculated here, but first impressions after d4, knight takes e4, maybe. Really scary. I mean, the computer is highlighting a really difficult move here. Not knight takes e4, but knight f6 to g4. I mean, one of those moves that once it's played, yeah, it looks kind of logical because you're eyeing the h2 pawn. But, you know, try finding the sequence of moves, knight h5, then knight back to f6, and then knight f6 to g4. That is a Herculean task for Magnus Carlsen. And these are the variations that might be circling around his mind right now.
Definitely. Shows that he feels like he needs some new impulses. This is a very typical common reaction of any top player, that you feel like somehow get some new feeling for the position. It's not easy. Yeah, he puts that pawn aside. Not yet.
It's hard to say. Not yet. And this is a 25 plus 10 rapid game. So playing objectively is much more important than playing quickly. You have time. We've seen players successfully spent over 10 minutes per move in this time control, because keeping a reasonable position is so important. Pragg still has 20 minutes on his clock, and he has made even 1 minute. So many problems. And the best news for Pragg is that he hasn't sacrificed anything to get this position. He can play slowly. And Magnus uncorking knight h5. Wow.
It is Magnus. Clearly, he understood that, okay, I have done all the natural moves. There has to be something in the position. He did spend a lot of time. He's under 15 minutes. And this is showing that what an incredible preparation it was from Pragg, that he managed to unbalance, unsettle Magnus right from the start. Magnus can't relax for a single second. He's under pressure.
Man, just the tension in a good sense with which Pragg plays. You know, the pressure that he puts on every player is really something else. It's honestly the level that he's played with for the better part of the last year. But now finally his rating catches up to his strength. Now, where will he put his queen? Queen to g5 is not the only move. The queen could also slide over to f3, and Carlsen's reaction to that move will likely be the same, right? He will drop back to f6. We might see Praggnanandhaa repeating the position once, but I find it very hard to believe, as I said earlier, that he will not try to squeeze more from this position than a draw.
I think knight f6, and he will remain ambitious. He just... But okay, we talked about this, that Black's only move is knight f6 according to computer. Not knowing the fact that this is the best move, there are also some arguments, and that's what Magnus goes for.
Great call, Peter. And g6, I think, is a very sensible move, because you're going to follow this with the move f6, and you're going to kind of blanket White's pieces with this, with these spikes, right? These pawns on f6 and g6, which together are controlling a lot of important squares, and potentially forcing White's queen to seek shelter on h4. Pragg might have to move some trouble. That might be a little bit too audacious. And I think knight hf3 satisfies the demands of the position, but Pragg goes forward to f5.
Wow, quite quickly he made this decision. I was trying to highlight how do we trap that queen on h6 after f6, queen h6, and the only way what I find was this rook f7, king h8, knight g8, which would have run into knight h6 checkmate. So just to, yes, just to highlight, yeah, that what a crazy construction this is, but Prague goes instantly for knight f5. This is a move that if it works out well, we will be saying that it was a great choice, putting the pressure on Magnus playing quickly. On the other hand, if Magnus somehow manages to neutralize Black's e7, is that possible, trying to make some control over the dark squares? Let me even put it, because I feel like this is so important, takes. And if not for the move king g7, I feel I'm seriously under pressure, but king g7, stopping f6, and eventually setting up some kind of ideas with queen f6.
And White's attack starts to run out of steam here. That's the problem. Prague is really lacking in this position a minor piece, a knight on g4, or maybe a dark squared bishop. So White could play some sort of accumulating move like rook a to e1, for example. But if you're resorting to a move like that, that means that the worst is behind Carlsen. Did Prague rush with this move, knight f5? It's a very thematic move. Fumes of his attack, but he might have given up that knight a little bit too early. And, the ostensibly more reserved knight ready to make his move. He can play f6, but that might be a little bit too weakening. King g7 does seem like the Magnus finding moves like king g7 on the regular.
Yes, I also feel on Magnus's body language like he's relieved.
Yeah.
That is the desired stability for Black, and especially we are talking about a rapid game. Even things now, however, Magnus feels like, all right, I have shut that bishop out for good, because even if White follows up e4, e takes d5, c takes d5 is still perfectly good for Black. Covering the dark squares, the knight on h5 does an extremely good job. And also the idea that eventually Black is really threatening to play queen f6, because it puts kind of a lot of pressure on the f5 pawn as well. I feel that this is maybe the first moment that Magnus is really happy with his position.
And there's a very important tactical detail. Let's take a neutral move like c3, just to illustrate. After queen f6, White's queen...
Or then let me play rook f2, or that not good enough?
I think it does. The line still works after rook f2. I was going to say after queen f6, queen g4. In fact, g4. You would like to keep the queens on the board. And ostensibly, after knight takes f5, e4 wins the knight. But the issue is this vulnerable placement of the queen on g4. Black's knight can go forward to e3, but even safer is to go back to h6. And Black gets out of the pin, counterattacking White's queen. And look at just the heroic defensive role exerted by the king on g7, which protects the queen on f6. And that means, the desperado sacrifice on h5. And Black will emerge with an extra exchange. So this is out of the question, which means queen f6 is a major positional threat, because if the queens go off the board, I think that we might start talking about a slight advantage for Black in the endgame.
Exactly. Too quickly with knight f5. Did he simply miss the move king g7, or he did not miss the move king g7, but he forgot that there might be a threat from Black with queen f6. It could have easily been that he had foreseen the structure, because especially when you make up your mind quickly, you think about the structure and you think like, all right, I have all the time in the world to double my rooks on the f-file. Knight takes f5 is never a problem due to the pin, and I'm going to insist on going f6. If Black ever plays the move f6, then White queen just falls back to g4, and the kingside structure will be very vulnerable. Everything depends on this wonderful queen f6 resource.
And Prague has shown an ability to adjust pretty seamlessly to the new demands of the position. His game against Hikaru Nakamura comes to mind. His first classical game where he was better, or the game in which he scored and on the clock. Prague was able to take a deep breath, gather himself, and put together an excellent defensive display to hold the position. He needs to do that here. He might not even be worse on the board. I think it's very important, Peter, to clarify. Probably Prague is not worse here, but the trend of the game, we talked about this yesterday, the trend of the game favors Black because Prague was just attacking. He was just paralyzing Black, and suddenly he's dealing with a very nasty positional threat. And the question of him being worse has suddenly been raised. Can he objective patient move like Rook A to E1?
Very tough, because I also don't know exactly what does this move really do to the position. Rook A1.
Yeah.
Why? First question: can't Black do the same with Queen F6? What is the difference?
Apparently,
no,
there
he
is
can't.
a difference.
Wow. So now Queen G4, Knight takes F5, E4, Knight H6, 7.
Woo. And you take the B7 pawn. But why was this move unnecessary to make this move possible? Maybe it's because after Queen H4, you're able to play Knight D7, apparently Queen D8. And if you take B7, Knight G4 hits the Rook on F2 and generates a lightning attack on the king side. It's the fact that the Rook on F2 would be really vulnerable, whereas the Rook on E1 would enable White to exert pressure on Black's center.
Wow. This line basically...
I'm looking at it and I still don't fully understand, Peter, like why Rook A1 is so crucial. My guess is that we might see a queen trade. I think Prague might bite the bullet and say, listen, after queen takes F6, maybe I can quickly go E4. I find it hard to believe that White is in big danger in the endgame, but obviously an endgame would play right into Magnus Carlsen's biggest strength, particularly in the rapid time control.
Yeah, the move that comes to my mind is that what happens after E4? It looks like maybe the most natural human move if we see that we can't follow it up with Rook F2. Magnus also leaning back on his chair, he definitely feels that he got stability, and this is what really matters for him. And the ball is back.
For sure. And the thinking time, I think, says it all. Prague is now down on the clock. Gone is the time advantage. Excellent opening preparation. I think it's an encouraging sign that he's taking his time. It means that he senses that the trend to make a stabilizing move. I'm with you, Peter. I think E4 is the move most grandmasters would play in a blitz game because it's thematic. You connect your pawns. Of course, you weaken the F4 square, but that doesn't seem particularly essential.
Yes, fighting for the center, making sure that the bishop from B3 is getting closer to the game. E takes D5 is always an idea. Then already the move Rook A1 will be so much more natural. It's and Prague goes King H1. All right, he just makes a neutral move.
Okay, but Queen F6 is very likely to follow. And Magnus might play that move fast because he had so much time to gather his thoughts while Prague was thinking. I feel like Queen F6 forces a queen.
This is the feeling I'm getting, that with King H1, does actually Prague signal that he completely misses Black's resource with Queen F6?
It's entirely possible.
Yeah, I'm shocked for the fact, because of course, thanks to computer, we have understood Queen F6 quite quickly. But assuming that he spent quite a lot of time and he did not opt for Rook F2 idea with Rook AF1, that's kind of surprising.
And Carlsen has to find Queen F6. You can also throw White's queen away with the move H6, but Queen F6 is the kind of Queen F6, Queen G4. The key thing to realize is that the pawn on F5 can be captured because you can unpin in the manner that we have previously described by dropping the knight away to H6 and counterattacking White's queen. If Magnus Carlsen sees that line, there is no question he will play Queen F6. And I think that he will find it. This is within his...
Also, look at his way of handling the situation. There is, however, also the other option, which is kind of tempting, to play something like H6, and after Queen H4, fall back with the knight to F6 with a tempo. Black moves away the queen, and the idea what I had in mind is somehow to go G6, G5, but that still at this moment runs into d4. So that's one of the reasons why this isn't as effective as queen f6.
And a queen trade would to attack, right? He was in that frame of mind where I'm going to tear this guy apart. I'm going to use my queen and generate chances against Black's king. Suddenly adjusting yourself to a slightly worse endgame, going from, a one-sided attack to a long and arduous defensive task in the endgame is very, very onerous from a psychological standpoint. So queen f6 is asking to be played, and he plays it. And this is a very difficult moment for the Indian talent. Will he trade queens? Will he stubbornly drop back to g4? This is not really a choice, Peter. He has to trade, and he has to.
Then he will be kicking himself of investing 5 minutes on king h1 and missing Black's idea of queen f6. This is a cold shower now for Prague. And the point is that, yes, now after queen g4, knight takes f5, there is nothing to talk about, because after e4, I guess that now even the forcing knight e3 works. White doesn't have any queen moves at all. The knight is hitting also the rook, and one of the lines that Computer was highlighting on some idea like rook d6, but for that idea it was essential to have that rook on e1, eyeing the e5 pawn already. Here Black would just trade that intruder easily with rook d8, and Black is just a very healthy pawn up. So I don't see another way of playing queen f6 was possible.
And every second that ticks away from his clock is a second that he could be spending trying to find the ideal defensive setup in the endgame. And I think that any defensive setup is connected to the move e3, e4. I think we will see that move. Probably he will take on g6 first. And of course, Carlsen can recapture several different ways. Then I think Prague will advance his, increase the influence of his bishop, and also Magnus Carlsen's chances in this endgame. There's no doubt that Black is probably the one pushing for a win here, but is it, 90-10? Is it 70-30 in Carlsen's favor? What's going through his mind right now?
I think that first of all, he's just very happy what happened here in the last couple of moves. He's relieved. At some point, like 15 minutes ago, it looked like he has a very tough. Now Magnus takes h take g6, clearly capturing towards the center. And I perfectly agree with you that somehow e4 is kind of the move that you want to play, because if you play e4 followed by rook e1, then eventually Black's pawn on e5 will be quite vulnerable. White will have e takes d5 ideas, and it's not so easy to move that knight from e7. So there's a big question, like after e4, is Black even potentially considering a trade on e4 and say that, you know what, yes, it's already on the board. Let me refresh. FG8G, e4, White is fighting for the center. And all eyes on Magnus, that does he bring the rook to d8, which gives White the chance to eventually target the e5 pawn, or is he releasing the tension but make sure that he fixes the structure?
And Carlsen has shown, making the position more complex. I think rook a d8 is right in his wheelhouse. On the other hand, if Carlsen wants to play with an abundance of caution, if he wants to say, listen, I know that I've got some chances here, but let me eliminate all risk first, then he will be more tempted to take on e4. And that is exactly what he does. D takes e4 on the board. It doesn't mean that Magnus isn't playing for a win. The position is still exceedingly dangerous for White. And he's also asking Prague a very unpleasant question, Peter. And White's down to 9 minutes. Every one of these questions is going to take more time off of White's clock. What is this question? Well, what are you going to take on e4 with? And it's not a given that pawn takes e4 is the best move, but Prague plays it. He wants to keep his knight, and he wants to keep active possibilities connected with the knight jumping to c4 and targeting both a5.
He would have traded the knights with knight e4. He could have been in for a very unpleasant defensive task. Now d takes e4, exactly because this vulnerable e5, a5 pawns, I believe that it should just be enough to keep the balance. And the good news is that that knight on e7 is still completely stuck. Imagine that this knight from e7 could jump to c5. You'll be saying that black is almost winning. That's the nuance we are talking about in this position. Black's other idea of eventually going knight d7, knight c5, it's also too slow. White only 4.
The atmosphere of this game is so intense. We've got over 120,000 watching on YouTube. A huge, huge shout out to everybody taking time out of your busy days and watching this epic 2023 World Cup reversed. But obviously, if Magnus Carlsen can deal the first blow with the black pieces, Praggnanandhaa will have to beat Magnus on demand with black. But I really, really like the fact that Pragg took on e4 quickly. He left himself with 9 minutes. He left himself with a lot of time to figure out the ideal defensive setup. And if he defends with the precision that he has displayed in endgames in previous matches, I think he should be able to hold the draw here.
Yes, I also think so, but I also get some information that apparently Fabiano has a great...
Wow. Basov's position is in shambles.
Yeah, now that we know that the Magnus game is a little bit slow and the situation has calmed down, this gave us a good chance to catch up. Look at that gorgeous bishop on e5, the dark squares, white's bishop on b3 completely out of the game. It's a wonderful situation for black.
It's a very one-sided position. Caruana brings his a-pawn up 2 squares. We don't even have to look more carefully at that game. It looks like Caruana has everything under control of the third-place matchup. Let's dive back into Pragg against Carlsen because it's becoming more intense, right? The clock situation is dwindling. Carlsen now below 7 minutes as he decides between the various candidate moves. What are those candidate moves? Well, rook a to d8 is the most obvious, but you also pointed out that c5 square. And you can't get the e7 knight to c5 efficiently, but you can bring the other knight over through d7 to c5. But Carlsen has opted for the more concrete option. He's gone rook a d8, and he's hit Pragg's knight.
Very natural move, because after knight c4, which kind of we most probably expect, on the other hand, white can also maybe try... Knight c4 is more natural, but what I wanted to say that after knight c4, Magnus takes on e4, and once you eliminate that e4 pawn, suddenly the knight from e7 comes to life. Black will have options to go knight d5 or knight f5, depending which pawn white is taking. Suddenly black gets a lot of activity. That's one of the most important things in rapid chess. So the move rook a d8.
Perhaps keeping the e4 pawn alive is even more important. And to keep it alive, you have to keep the knight on d2. To keep the knight on d2, you have to defend it. And to defend it, you have to bring the rook up from f1 to f2. There's also the move rook a to d1, but somehow, just intuitively, that strikes me as a lot more awkward. Now, rook f2, and you could chase that knight out of g4 with h3. So it's a little bit hard to play this move, but Pragg does it again. Very precise.
Super important. Making sure that the knight from e7 is not yet reaching. There is also another argument that
Praggnanandhaa's caliber. So knight c8, rook a f1. It leads to some crazy tactics there because black can play knight to g4 and try to exploit the weakness of white's first rank. But is Magnus interested in this kind of confrontation? No, he's not. And he's played rook d4, but what happens if Pragg still plays the move rook a to f1? What's the idea here?
Well, basically there are two ideas. He can rely on the defense knight e7 to g8, which is a stabilizing move. Or is he planning to go for adventure with knight takes e4? I don't think it's not Magnus's style to go for such tacticals. Exactly, knight e7 to g8 on the board.
But how is he going to untangle this? He want to play b5 and expand on the queen side. Let's say Pragg plays a neutral move like h3. And h3 isn't even a neutral move. You're preparing to storm the g-pawn up to g5 and kick the knight out of f6. Carlsen cannot afford to lose the f7 pawn with check. What is Magnus's intended way of untangling on the king side? Is it rook d7?
It's a big question, yes. I like the move h3, but first Pragg kicks the rook away. Nice
Okay.
little touch. C3, so black most probably falls back to D7, yes, on the board already.
Now Rook E2 deserves attention, freeing up the knight and preparing knight C4. And he's done it. Great play by Prague here these last couple of moves. It feels like suddenly he's the one who's largely out of the woods here.
Definitely has improved his position. The knight is threatening to jump to c4. If black plays the move b5, which stops knight c4, then white can suddenly start rerouting his knight to f3, hitting that e5 pawn. And if black has to keep on somehow defending that e-pawn with rook e8 or rook e7, white's knight might even land on g5, inserting some more pressure on the f7 pawn.
It really feels like Carlsen did not squeeze the maximum. All credit to Prague. He has once again kept his composure, and he's also kept a time advantage, right? He's rebuilt those extra 2 minutes on the clock, and Carlsen probably will go b7, b5 in order to cover the c4 square. He might also deploy from weakness of the f7 pawn and knight c4, which is a big problem.
Yes, I somehow feel like b5 is the natural follow-up, and b5, knight f3, I would even go rook e7. I somehow sense that Magnus's idea was with this knight e7 to g8 to somehow set up this strategical idea of eventually moving that knight from f6 to d7 and the knight from
c4. That is begging to be played. It hits the a5 pawn. Will Magnus initiate crazy tactics there with b5? Again, that's not really congruent with his style. Magnus trying to keep things relatively tactics-free in this endgame. Does that mean he is preparing to meet knight c4 with rook a8?
Probably, but it's strange. There is this potential weakness on f7. Yes, the rook on e7 is protected. Very risky. I don't see yet the follow-up, but white's knight might be able to get to d6. Then, of course, Magnus will kick that knight away with rook d8. By Magnus's choices.
It's not entirely unlikely that we get some sort of repetition of moves, right? Both players perspective, he's already survived a scare at the start of this endgame. Magnus Carlsen's scare came earlier in the middle game. But will Prague suddenly say, hey, your pieces are mighty passive all of a sudden. I'm up a minute on the clock. Let me try to press on the gas pedal. Big question whether Prague will play knight c4. I think the answer is likely yes. But he could also make a slower improving play if he wants to wait for Magnus to put his cards on the table. And he makes one of those moves. Bishop drops back to c2, overprotecting the e4 pawn.
That's 7 pawn. On the other hand, probably Prague has sensed that black has enough defenses. Knight d7 played. Exactly, Magnus is trying to reroute his knights.
Mm-hmm.
But is it not the right time to jump knight c4? Attacking that pawn, and knight's a different story, because after rook a8, black isn't able to kick that knight immediately out of the game, and if you follow up with the natural knight c5, we might be able to start asking some question to that pawn on f7. Very interesting endgame on the board.
On the board, knight c4 and rook a8. Although even in that final position we were analyzing, black's rook could go from a8 back to f8. I'm just not seeing, how Prague can do more than ask questions. He can pose threats to the f7 to keep everything at bay. I think the likeliest outcome here is a draw, but the situation getting more tense with every passing second. Both sides are now under 5 minutes. So this is, at this point, the equivalent of a blitz game.
Yes, and I also feel there is so much tension in the position. Terms, black can still be better if black somehow gets knight gf6, knight c5 in, and white is unable to use the moment for active counterplay, then slowly black will start to take over. It's a typical kind of peer defense. Yeah, it's pawn structure. If he coordinates forces, then after all, let's not forget that white has 3 pawn islands, and black only has 2. And the knights will work beautifully together.
And Magnus has already converted a couple of slight advantages in the endgame in typical Magnus style. He did it on demand against Vincent Keimer to win the second match game and force a Raipa tiebreak. Surely in a draw that would have won him the match, but the fact remains Carlsen has shown a lot of endgame prowess in this tournament. Prague, he knows that he cannot relax. He cannot make a couple of lazy moves and give Carlsen's knights more activity. And G4, what a committal decision by Prague. The engine doesn't like it. He's trying to drive the pawn up to G5 and restrict the knight on G8. But what if Carlsen drops into F6 and hits that pawn?
Yes, and provokes G5, then the knight jumps to H5. Suddenly, there will be a very lovely spot on F4. Clearly, Prague relies on... But then black might get the E5 square for the other knight. Strategically, this is a very committal decision.
And after knight Gf6, the knight could actually drop back to H7 and then either backward to F8 or forward to G5 and eventually try to plant itself on F4. But Magnus, he plays pawn to F6 rather. That is a huge surprise to me.
A very big surprise. And knight F7.
G5.
Exactly, and Prague jumps on the possibility. He instantly played the move rook G2, making sure that he will be able to meet knight H6 with G5.
And a very risky move, followed by an incredibly alert reaction by Prague. Knight H6 is met with G5, and you need to play it now, because if the knight gets back to F7, then black institutes that clamp on the G5 square. And the worst case scenario for white is if you allow that knight to reach F4. That is the promised land. You have to open up the position in order to prevent that from happening. This position is going to keep sharpening up, especially if Prague carries out the G5 pawn break, which seems very likely given what he's just played.
Exactly. I think this is what he had in his mind when he opted for G4. Can we talk about mutual hallucination or believing each other? Sometimes in the heat of the battle it can happen. And F6 rook G2 on the board. Now white has everything under control. One can forget about G4 being a question mark. G4 was a very good move if black had to play the move F6.
And Magnus can't stop because the medicine is way worse than the disease. That would create a massive hole on F5. White could play knight D6 or knight E3, and knight D6 would carry a double attack on the B7 pawn and the F5 square. A lot of time here. He's down to 2.5 minutes, and he finally decides on knight H6. Prague very likely to play G5 here and launch an all-out assault on that G6 pawn, which will be made a lot more vulnerable by the fact that the G file will open up.
Yeah, however he's posing, he's not blitzing out. We assume that he will be very happy that he gets the chance of playing G5. And G5, F take G5, rook take G5, knight F7, that's the move that also gives black a lot of stability. The knight comes with a little bit of pressure on the G6 pawn. Also, this knight D6, knight F5 ideas are there, but things are heating up. G5 on the board.
Yep. And we have that position. Takes, and knight F7. As you were just showing, Peter, the G5, and it drops back to G2. And I thought that rook G3 made a little bit more sense, but maybe Prague trying to bring his rook all the way back away from the influence of black's knights.
Yeah, rook G3 looked a bit more natural, but okay, if you are in blitz mode, Magnus as well, making sure that the D6 square is beautifully eventually setting up this very nice little rook F6. We have already seen the move queen F6, which had such a big impact on the game. I do believe that rook F6 also combined with some knight F8 defending the G6 pawn is a wonderful rerouting for black.
The initiative has changed hands several times in this endgame, but that doesn't mean it can't change hands again. Prague now down to 2.5 minutes. And if black's knights get active, there is still that F4 square, there is still the D file, and there is still the rook on A8, which has not made its presence felt just yet. But if Prague takes his foot off the gas pedal and he lets black's knights get active, it's so hard to deal with a pair of active knights in time pressure. The move bishop B3 comes to mind, but case in point, you might be running into potentially knight d7 to c5, although and knight takes c5, all of that has to be calculated carefully, and Prague now under 2 minutes. You can sense the anxiety, both players locked in concentration.
Yeah, very critical moment. It's if someone just this position has so much spice, there is so lot of finesses, very crucial decisions for both sides in the next couple of moves.
Rook d2 hitting the knight directly. The knight can move, but Carlsen could also meet fire with fire. He could slide his rook to f6 nonetheless, and he does. And he offers an exchange of rooks that seems to be in black's favor.
Sensational play. Basically, rook e6 was connected by rook f6. Everything else would have run into some tactical issues. Amazing play by Magnus.
And Prague now down to a minute on the clock. He's suddenly down 2 minutes board. He can double on the d file. He can play rook f to d1, but then you have to reckon with the black knight getting super active on c5, and white's king is not entirely safe. The rook from a8 could later on, it could slide to the h file and start exerting pressure on h2. 40 seconds for Praggnanandhaa as he exchanges rooks, tries to simplify the position, and I like that decision.
I think it was the correct call. It's not about fighting for initiative. You just on the clock. You have things under control. Maybe even go b4. Yes, b4 on the board.
Excellent move. He is trying to simplify things by force. Exchange pawns, make this position easier to play, easier to handle with less than a minute on the clock. And Peter, he's built up 20 very important seconds.
b7 pawn, and if I gonna get the pawn to a5, if I ever take that pawn on b7, then the a pawn will be way too powerful. This puts Magnus also on alert. I don't think that he can afford to play for the initiative. It might be that it's a dynamic balance.
And if he plays the move b5 himself, he runs into knight to b6 followed by a5. So it's entirely possible for black to lose control of this game. And I love Prague's last move, b2, b4, remaining on top and creating practical pressure on black's queen side as Carlsen.
Ideas like king e7, rook d8, trying to trade rooks. Is that a possibility, or is he thinking that if I have the king on e7, making sure that the anti-squares d7, d6 are well covered, then maybe I will be able to activate my rook on the h file? Is he hoping for some counterplay?
The center and maybe trying to overprotect the e4 pawn with king f3. First, he plays a day. And Carlsen, we mentioned this move earlier. He brings his rook to the other side of the board, and he's starting to exert pressure on Prague's king side. That rook can dive into h4 and hit e4, and black's knights are rearing to get even more active. This could get out of control for Prague, who's down to 20 seconds now on the clock.
Yeah, he's under some pressure. Yeah, it's never easy to start defending something with little time on the clock.
He's got to move, and he does get 10 seconds added to his clock per move, but the situation, this is getting scary for Prague.
The king g2 move was very unfortunate. Now he has to sidestep from the fork. King g1 played.
Knight f4, Magnus sensing the moment, and the other knight can jump into g5, creating fork threats, maybe.
Just in a couple of, and Prague down to 8 seconds.
And look at the speed with which Carlsen is moving. Every piece becoming more and more active. The rook coming into h3. It can drive into c3. And suddenly there are all these forks that Prague has to keep in mind. He's got 6 seconds. And a6, a very panicky reaction as he gives up.
c3 also, bishop a4 can be met by rook cc, knight g5. All this combination of forces seem too much to handle.
Knight g5 might be crushing because if white takes on e5, black's king just moves up to e6, forces the knight out of e5, and then knight f3 will fork the rook and the king. And Magnus doesn't see it. He plays, but knight g5 now is even stronger. And he plays it.
Knight f3 fork, Prague in a lot of trouble.
Knight f3, the knights are running amok. White's counterplay on the queen side has not amounted to anything. And Carlsen has left himself with 3 whole minutes on the clock to figure out the last couple of touches here. Black is completely winning here, but Prague will continue to fight until the last drop of blood. He tries to get the rooks off the board, but Carlsen can play rook a3, and there's got to be some sort of a checkmating mechanism here. Knight h3 and rook a3 wins the game. It wins a piece.
Exactly. And Magnus pauses because he knows exactly that king f1 or king h1 will have the same problem that rook a3 will follow with a double attack on the bishop and rook a1 checkmate. The knights, just monster knights.
A lot of turnarounds and the initiative changed hands, but Carlsen laughs last, and he will laugh longest in this first game. He will just move his king to f6, getting away from the checks, and the threat of rook a1 checkmate and rook takes a4 forces Praggnanandhaa to resign the first game. And you can see there a dejected Prague will not have a lot of time to marinate on this game because he has a task in front of him, and that is to win the next game with the black pieces, Peter.
A big victory for Magnus Carlsen.
There's a reason he is often called the greatest endgame player of all time. The way that he's able to seize the initiative, to apply practical pressure, nobody can handle that when Magnus is in the best form. Prague playing such a good game. This could have gone either way. Scramble. He will have to win the next game to force the Blitz playoffs. You can see Fabiano Caruana also won the game with the black pieces, and Nijat Abbasov in a similar predicament to Praggnanandhaa. Two Herculean tasks will have to be put together, Peter, by Abbasov and, of course, by Prague.
First of all, they have to forget what happened in the first game. That's the step number one, the most important one. Clearly, very difficult. They have like 10. We'll at least make a draw, and with black, we want to be solid. That's not the case anymore. They will have to make crazy decisions in the opening and try to go for the maximum right from the start.
With a draw or a victory, Magnus Carlsen wins his first World Cup, and Praggnanandhaa's incredible run will come to an end. He will have to settle for runner-up, but that is only one possible reality. With a victory, with the black pieces, Prague and Abbasov will force this match to keep going. There's only one way to find out which of these narratives, which of these storylines we will be telling after the next game. A huge shout out. We had around 200,000 of you watching across the platforms and the best break. But first, we're going to take a couple of minutes. When we come back, we will set the stage for the second and possibly decisive game of the 2023 World Cup.
Chess players of all time.
And I went my next move. I said, no, I'm not moving my queen. I'm not moving my bishop. But actually, I'm going to give checkmate or winning great material. And I went knight e3. It works only that way. If you're an attacker, you sacrifice something, go all the way until the end. Don't chicken out in the meantime at some point, because many times there is a point there is no way back. It's only forward. How is it to play with Kasparov? When you saw him personally, he really had this incredible.
And I hope you're ready to dive into the past with us.
Oh, absolutely. I'm very happy to share with you some of my.
1 minute, 10 seconds. Every
Surviving.
We're rook a8. Whoa! He blundered his queen. He's got 40 more seconds. He needs to burn. Oh my God! He's gonna flag. No! He flagged! He flagged! He flagged! Oh my God! Oh my God! He made it! Oh my God!
Strong that way! Oh, get him on the board!
He's just gonna move quickly.
Oh! Welcome to the final day of action at the 2023 FIDE World Cup. Today, possibly in only a couple of minutes, a winner will be determined. One game, one draw, or one win stands between Magnus Carlsen and his first ever World Cup victory. Grandmaster Daniel Naroditsky, Grandmaster Peter Leko chopping it up for you today on this epic final day of action that culminates a month-long tournament in which so many players tried their hand, shot their shot, but only one winner will emerge, possibly after the next game. Peter, let's not sugarcoat it. The task in front of Praggnanandhaa is Herculean. He's been here before. He lost the first match game against his compatriot Arjun Erigaisi with white. He was in trouble against Fabiano Caruana. But this is a task of entirely different magnitude, to defeat Magnus Carlsen with black on demand.
Certainly. On the other hand, he has done it against Arjun Erigaisi. That will give him confidence. The big question, we're gonna see Pragg answer that with c5, no e5, no symmetry. And there is another question, like 1d4 kind of option is also very tempting, just to make sure that your opponent doesn't get those unbalanced positions that Pragg is familiar with in the Sicilian, but not exactly against d4. I think he has a very solid, good repertoire with black, but doesn't have too much experience of gambling.
And in order to defeat Magnus Carlsen, I'm recusing myself from this conversation. I have no idea how to do that. But the famous quote by Alexander Alekin comes to mind. And he said that to defeat me, you have to beat me 3 times, in the opening, in the middle game, and in the end game. And I think Pragg realizes that he has to break this task down into its component parts. And the first component part is to get an unbalanced position out of the opening. The second is to develop an initiative in the middle game. And then the third is to break down Magnus Carlsen's stalwart resistance. This will be an incredibly difficult task, but Pragg has demonstrated supreme confidence. He's demonstrated a lot of patience, and he's demonstrated universality. He has shown skillfully play virtually any type of position. So if anybody can do it, then it probably is Pragg in the form that he is currently in. But he's not the only one who will have to win on demand. Nijat Abbasov lost his first game in crushing style to Fabiano Caruana, and he too will have to win the second game with black on demand. Peter, we focused on the Carlsen-Pragg game and forgot what happened in Nijat's game.
Yeah, we actually missed all the action. Wow, what?
Whoa, oh, knight c6. What is this?
Exactly, that's what I'm also thinking about. Look at this, and e3, e5, Fabiano coming up with some very interesting new idea, clearly also surprising his opponent. d5, knight e7, that's how things got completely out of control right at the start.
And he gives up the bishop pair, and it looks totally justified, Peter, because you're ruining black's pawn structure. But there is this very typical plan here where black fixes the center with d6 and then starts expanding on the king side with f6, f5. And I feel like, practically speaking, these types of positions where black possesses the bishop pair and kind of a big pawn phalanx on the king side are practically difficult to play. And perhaps even objectively, it looks like white is already worse. And the situation just did not want to start to expand on the other side of the board. And he did not catch a break the rest of the game.
Yes, this b5, queen a5, and things escalated on the queen side. Black's bishop on e5 will have a lovely square. I think this is what we witnessed. Yeah, this was the position when we joined in. It looked very promising for black. Queen b4 setting up the decisive a5, a4, breaking white's construction on the queen side. Rook c2, a5, rook cf2, rook takes c3. Wow,
Oh,
beautiful.
what a combination.
Yes, yes. Let me just show that b takes c3 runs into queen h4, winning material, punishing white's rook on f2. Sensational stuff by Fabiano.
Such a smooth game, and Nijat Abbasov was forced to resign a couple of moves later, trying to mix things up, but to no avail. Caruana's attack, coupled with his material advantage, turned decisive, and after winning white's rook, Nijat Abbasov put his king down. What a game by Caruana, what a game by Carlsen, and this match will determine the third place finisher. Before we get to our second, quickly, that on Monday, August 28th, you will not want to miss the exciting match between two of the brightest stars in young chess. Tani Adewumi takes on IM Alice Lee for the 5th edition of Tani versus the World. Can he rise to the challenge and take down the 3rd youngest female IM of all time? Fun Master Mike Klein and Women's FM Kinga Polak cover all the action at twitch.tv/chesskid. Use exclam Tani, exclam TANI in chat to learn all about it. Mark your calendars for August 28th, 10 a.m. Eastern Time. Well, mark your calendars for 20 seconds from now, because the second match game in this decisive World Cup match between Carlsen and Pragnananda is about to begin. And if you're Prague position, you cannot allow it to get too dry or too drawish. Let's see what Prague can offer us. E4 by Carlsen.
That's a kind of slight surprise for me. C5 obviously played, and C3. Magnus sticks to the Alapin, the strategy that Erigaisi used against Pragnanda, which backfired. On the other hand, now already Magnus anticipates, he knows which setup Prague is intending in a must-win situation.
And Magnus played it against Gukesh in their second match game. Carlsen winning with black and playing the Alapin in the second. Carlsen did get the kind of position out of the opening that he wanted. The Alapin Sicilian is known as one of the most solid systems, one of the most solid anti-Sicilians, and one of the hardest to break down and to generate imbalances against. If White is intent on making a draw in the Alapin, it's pretty hard to stop him.
Yes, and this is the first deviation compared to the Arjun Pragnanda game. There, I think we have witnessed c takes d4, d6, bishop c4, and then knight b6, bishop b5, bishop d7. And that's where you revealed us all the secrets. No, it was David Howell. David Howell was revealing his secret games with Kasparov, of course. Was sensational stuff, but Magnus forced Prague into a completely different structure. I believe that the main theoretical move is d7, d5 here, when White can simply take e takes d6, queen d6, and the move knight a3, or maybe just capturing back on d4 gives White a very solid position.
Or even castle and kingside. I think in all those situations, you get a bunch of minor piece trades, and this is a very well-chosen opening by Magnus Carlsen. He knows that in order for Prague to avoid the incredibly drawish lines that arise from the move d5 or d6, Prague might have to take on c3, and that is an incredibly speculative move. Accepting the sacrifice here is wildly dangerous. Find some way to preserve some sort of imbalance, even if it means getting into a worse position. And that's actually why he's thinking, right? Normally, he would be blitzing out queen takes d6. As it stands, he's asking himself on every move, can I find any way to maintain an imbalance? No, he goes down the main line. And castle short by Carlsen. Here the main move is bishop e6.
Yeah, that's the professional move. The only problem is that bishop e6 might run into bishop takes e6, queen takes e6, knight takes. But hang on, how is this? Knight takes d4, knight takes d4, queen d4 is still kind of playable in the position.
This is a pretty old theoretical line. Sometimes black's queen actually goes into e2, if I remember correctly. I think queen f4 is considered to be the modern main line. White's queen can dive into c7, but something tells me Magnus will that position. Maybe after bishop e6, he wants to play with the immediate knight takes d4. Your idea is also on the menu for White. So something tells me Magnus has chosen strategically a line that essentially bails the game out, but it remains to be seen what exact.
Yes, I'm a little bit confused because on the other hand, yeah, this is a line that you want to make sure that if you already liquidate, it will guarantee you definite liquidation. You don't want to stay in the middle, that yes, it's kind of drawish, but it's still playable. Black has some chances. Is Magnus maybe having some very deep preparation, and after bishop e6, we might be seeing some very sharp knight ac, knight b5, and forget about liquidation. He just wants to make sure that black is on the defensive.
Would have run into bishop takes f7 check. I know this line, though. This is bad news for Prague, Peter. Let's quickly show bishop g4, bishop takes f7 check. followed by knight g5, picking up the bishop. Unfortunately, the move that Prague has chosen, I'm very well acquainted with it, and it leads almost takes d4, opens up the c3 square for white's knight. After black plays e6 and bishop e7, so I think the line goes e6, knight c3, bishop e7, queen f3, and I mean, we're not even talking about advantage for white and an ultra in the center. This is really bad news in the early going, and this is not any of Prague's fault. I mean, what are you supposed to do against the Alapin?
Yes, it's simply that you shouldn't have lost the first game with white. Yeah, that's the problem. Yeah, if the game would have been drawn, then Magnus would play a completely different type of chess. That would also give Prague counter chances. Yeah, this is a chain reaction. Magnus also, he is so familiar with everything. Yeah, he has been in all kinds of situations hundreds of times. We have seen it in the Champions Chess Tour in the last couple of years that whenever Magnus got the lead in the match, it was no way stopping him. He knows exactly how to handle any situation. He knows his openings. He knows all these sidelines very well. It's a mammoth task for Prague to do anything with this position.
Yeah, that position is just devoid of any kind of imbalance of any character. I think we are going to see queen f3 here. Of course, Carlsen could strike immediately with d5, but perhaps that would allow e5, maintaining some form of intrigue in the center. Although even there, I think the knight can jump into b5, and at best, that seems like a very dubious option for black. But if I'm remembering correctly, queen f3 is the book recommendation, and obviously the word unfortunately should be put in its proper context. Regardless of the result of this game, this will be the performance of Prague's lifetime, and he will have his head held very high, as will all of his fans, as he exits the tournament hall. But too early to say. Magnus will count the chickens when they've hatched. He still has some work to do in this position.
The big question, what is he really playing for now? We know that all he needs is a draw, and you mentioned the book recommendation being queen f3, probably for the fact that white can even try to play for an advantage. On the other hand, the idea that opening up the center with d4, d5, no. And Magnus does play the move queen f3. He plays according to the demands of the position.
And queen takes d4 here is way too brazen. It allows queen takes b7. And the problem is that white ties himself to the bishop on e7. Black cannot castle kingside. And because black cannot castle kingside, the threat of knight b5 and knight c7 is absolutely devastating. So, yes, this is a way to unbalance the position. Queen to d7 here, also very important. Peter White could even start with queen takes a8, but more precise is the immediate. It's just, there's just nothing that can be done here. If you're Prague, you have to castle. And after d5, Magnus is not going to lose that game.
Yeah, it's a very unfortunate situation. You know that you need to win. You want to keep tension in the position, and castle on the board, played by Prague. All eyes on Magnus. Will he play d5, or will he try to keep some tension?
Rook d1 also possible. Yeah.
This is the professional way of handling situation. You don't want to keep the tension if you only need a draw, making sure. And besides, it's a very unfortunate situation for black. Black needs to play for a win. On the other hand, even if you ask me how does black equalize, I would not be able to answer that question. White is just so much more harmonious with his queen on f3, knight c3, bishop on b3. After d takes c6, bishop f4 might come with a tempo, hitting that queen on d6. Just too many problems. Black even needs to. Things are not escalating.
And I think they already are. This would be a dream position for Magnus in a regular classical game, much less in a situation where he can afford to bail out and make a draw. The problems for black are manifold. First of all, the pressure in the center is massive. The bishop on f5 is an issue. It doesn't allow you to play the move e5, which you would really love to play. It doesn't allow you to take on d5. White's got many ways that he can develop his initiative. Bishop f4 is the obvious move with tempo, but pawn takes e6 and queen takes b7 is going to pick up a very important pawn on the queen side and maintain complete symmetry of the pawn structure. With the center pawns gone, that's what makes this position almost impossible for black to win. 5 minutes remaining.
For sure. It almost also feels to me that if Magnus would be in a must-win situation in this game, we would be also praising that, wow, what a chance. It's a golden opportunity because black is under a lot of pressure. I do see the engine line, and the computer already suggests that a move like a7, a5 being the only move in the position to create some ideas. It's also connected probably with the pawn sacrifice, but let's forget about the pawn. It's much more important to get some counterplay.
I'm at a loss for suggestions here. I'm not seeing a single satisfactory move. I mean, even rook 8 to b8 came to my mind as a desperate way to try to keep the b7 pawn protected. Bishop f4 there can be met with e5. And, you know, bishop f4 does cut the contact between the queen and black's light squared bishop. The issue is that Magnus has a vast menu that he can choose from. He can play rook e1. He can play pawn takes e6 and win the game immediately, because after bishop e6, now bishop f4 will skewer the queen and the rook and pick up the exchange. It's sad, you know, to watch Pragg trading. He is trying his absolute hardest to find some way to keep the intrigue alive.
Yeah, and the clock is ticking. No good options, no easy option at all. Not obvious what he should be doing. I do hope that out of desperation, he will come up with this computer move a7, a5. It's still the only move that I see.
And Pragg has been the consummate professional all tournament long. He has been faced with so many difficult situations. He's been faced with a must-win situation with the black pieces multiple times in his match against Arjun Aragaisi, and every time he responded with ever-increasing grit and professionalism. But this is an entirely different animal. Not only are you playing Magnus, but the position that you have is so devoid of winning potential. That's what we keep coming back to. And Pragg ultimately decides on the move bishop g6, which I like. At least he will open up the f file, and at least you're going to get some imbalance in terms of the pawn structure.
Yeah, it's probably a good practical choice. Now, black is setting up the threat of going e6, e5, and that would create that kind of tension in the position that is required for Pragnanda. Clearly, Magnus makes sure that the structure is fixed. D takes e6, f e6 on the board, and now I'm just stability. Black has trouble defending the pawn on e6. Clearly, again, black has 3 pawn islands versus white's 2. Whenever we see these structures, I think it's very instructive to highlight that this is a big deficit in black structure. The only move to block that diagonal with knight d5 runs into different problems, and Pragg has opted for a pawn
sacrifice also leads to a queen trade. Queen takes e6 here would essentially force the queens off the board, because queen to d8 there runs into rook d1. And I mean, obviously, that is entirely counterproductive. Carlsen could also play rook d1, but I think having identified...
You hold the position, not even talking about that black needs to win this.
No, I mean, you have to trade. White will proceed by developing his dark-scored bishop, likely to e3. And, you know, I would caution people against criticizing Pragg. If he offers a draw here, it's not for lack of effort. I mean, the one thing that you cannot criticize Pragg for this tournament is lack of effort. He has put every ounce, every iota of energy onto this chessboard. This event has lasted a month. And if he decides that he has no more winning chances, he might offer a draw here. And that would be an entirely understandable decision. There is just nothing left to play for in this endgame. Bishop e3 is going to be the dagger move, forcing the bishops off the board.
Yeah, bishop e3. Magnus is also sacrificing the pawn back, because after rook f8, he has bishop f7. Very important, making sure that you also trade off those bishops.
Yeah. Painful moments for Prague. No matter who you're rooting for, if you're a Magnus fan, you watch with sympathy. It's never pleasant. It's never easy to lose a final like this, but there's absolutely no shame. Hey, you lost to the greatest player in chess history. And how did you lose? You lost in a completely double-edged struggle that could have gone either way. You had Magnus where you wanted him out of the opening. So for Prague, zero shame, zero embarrassment. To the contrary, he put up a monumental fight all the way to the end. But it looks like his time at the World Cup is coming to an end, and he will have to settle for the runner-up position.
It was also so nice to see him giving the interview yesterday after he realized that, yes, Magnus was not feeling well the last couple of days, that he really hopes that Magnus will be able to recover and show his best. That's the sportsmanship. Yeah, that's the Prague. He's not trying to use some advantage on Magnus feeling not well. He wishes him the best and he wants to beat Magnus at his best. It does seem like it isn't going to happen. Rook f8 on the board. I'm expecting the move bishop f7, but
Bishop
White
f7.
can also... But also White can fall back with the bishop to b3, saying that, you know what, I want to make sure that that knight from b6 will never start jumping to c4.
Indeed. Yeah, bishop f7 just forces the bishops up the board. Magnus still has all of the time that he started with, minus 30 seconds. But to come back to the graciousness demonstrated by Prague as Magnus drops back to b3, he will give back his extra pawn, but in return, he will activate the rook from a1 and put it either on d1 or even more to the point on e1. This is what makes Prague, I think, as well as the other Indian talents, so easy to root for. I mean, at 18 years old, the professionalism that he demonstrates on the board, but also off the board, so gracious, so humble, great sense of humor. I think he's got all of the skills that he needs on the board, but once again, off the board in order to have a long and illustrious chess career. And maybe one day in the not so distant future, a shot at the world title. And his journey will begin with a participation in the candidates tournament, where he has already secured a spot alongside Fabiano Caruana, and as Magnus Carlsen has turned down his participation already. So a lot of the credit goes to Prague's family, his mom who travels with him to the tournaments and worries over every game, and obviously the hundreds of thousands, millions of fans who watch every step that these exciting Indian players take and cheer them on. This is just the beginning for Praggnanandhaa, and this is finally the coveted World Cup. Like he is only moments away from claiming the final feather in his cap.
Yeah, I think we have to mention for the viewers who are not that familiar with positions that we would never dare to speculate about this kind of things if there would be real tension in the position. Black's problem is, however, that he's forced with the decision that he has to depart from his rook on e3. He can't play the move rook a8. Yes, and there is a handshake, rook takes e1, followed by a draw for nothing left to do.
And the players amicably discussing this game. Perhaps a quick discussion of the opening theory. A great choice by Magnus Carlsen to play the Alpen to f3. It started becoming clear that Prague's winning chances were just non-existent. And in typical professional clean style, Magnus Carlsen secures victory at the 2023 World Cup. As we just said, the final feather in his cap, which had been eluding him for the better part of a decade. As he crushes the field, he wins so many iconic matches. He survives an incredible scare against Vincent Keimer. He wins a game on demand and now defeats Praggnanandhaa in a scintillating rapid tiebreak to claim the World Cup title. But we still have one more game. Nijata Basov tries to do what Praggnanandhaa could not and force a blitz tiebreaker with a victory over Fabiano with the black pieces. Let's go straight to that other game, having congratulated both Magnus Carlsen and his opponent on an amazing match, and Magnus on the World Cup title.
Yeah, obviously a fantastic achievement by Magnus. He wanted very much. That's why he came. That was his mission in Baku, and he seals it with a stunning to Magnus. It was the only title missing in his incredible, illustrious career. It's kind of insane to think about that something was missing, but that one has been fulfilled as well. And right here, what do we have? Some crazy action. Fabiano Caruana with the white pieces sacrificed a piece, but Black is in a lot of trouble, and that piece will be taken back immediately.
Black is dead here. I mean, just look at Black's king, White's queen on h5, hovering over the king like the sword of Damocles. And that last move, c3, tells us all that we need to know. It forks the bishop and the knight, but even if it didn't, the knight on d4 is paralyzed. It is pinned to the queen. So Caruana, a resignation here by Nijat Abbasov. Once again, to draw this game would be an absolute miracle. To win it is totally impossible.
Yeah, and again, we can admire the preparation level of the top players. Yeah, Magnus Carlsen and also Fabiano Caruana, knowing exactly how to handle these situations. They have so many weapons at their arsenal, and they can suddenly use the lines which they might not play in a classical game when they have the white pieces, because they want more than just stability. They want to win the game. However, at this moment, they can rely on solid lines, very sound lines, which require Black to be perfectly precise in order to neutralize White's pressure. But that is not even an option for them. And that's why they are ending up in trouble, making also the task of both Fabi and Magnus then even simpler.
And Magnus's performance, the storyline that accompanies his victory, has dwarfed a lot of the other incredible performances that we've observed. But there have been many. Of course, Nijat Abbasov will have to settle for 4th place, but a trip to the candidates tournament, sum of money earned by Nijat, the hometown hero. But of course, Fabiano Caruana, so impressive. The way that he has resurged back to form, back to the form that we know that Fabi is capable of. Such clean play, such classy play as he dispatches Lenier Dominguez, and now Nijat Abbasov, and so many other very powerful players en route to claiming the bronze medal.
I also feel that since Nijat is clearly calculating, looking at ways how to stay in the game, gives us a chance to very quickly understand how did this happen, and we do see the Rosso Limo. We have been talking about that. This is the main weapon of Abbasov, but clearly he was afraid of Fabiano's preparation. That's why he deviated yesterday with e6 on move 2. And this is a very professional way from Fabiano, going for the main line of this Rosso Limo, which is considered that. But the knight jump with g4 is trying to spice things up. The main line clearly being c takes d4, knight takes d4, leading to a very solid position. I have to jump back to live action. c3, bishop d6, and c takes d4 had been played. White recaptures the piece, and still the king on f8 in a lot of trouble. The pawn on h6 is falling. White has all kinds of crazy ideas. The rook on d1 is in the game. The rook on a1 is already also eyeing the 7th rank. It's a total catastrophe.
Complete. But this is a lost cause that he's fighting here. Rook a7. You could fill a volume with the winning moves. Fabi might choose to take on h6 and pocket that pawn. No, he does play rook a7. I think he's going to go down the best line, which is rook takes b7, and then sticking his knight on c5, hitting where it hurts. And once again, we might be just a couple of moments away from the conclusion of the final game here at the 2023 World Cup. This game is as over as it gets. Black is as dead as a doorknob.
It's hopeless. No, nothing to be done. The knight cannot really be tolerated. Yes, bishop d5 played a beautiful little... loses on the spot due to bishop h2 check. Let me even put it on board. Bishop h2 check, king takes h2, queen takes d5, and suddenly Black wins the queen.
Wow. Just gotta stay alert until the last move is played, until the score sheets are signed, until the handshake occurs. The simplest is bishop takes b5, because not only does that pocket a queenside pawn, but you're also threatening bishop to c6, deflecting Black's bishop, and then it's White who wins Black's queen in the event of a fork on e6. I wouldn't be able to play this a second longer, Peter, if I'm honest. Just looking at Black's position elicits total disgust. This is just so nasty.
It's a total collapse. White even has Rook A1, Rook A7 ideas as well. So can't really run away with his king to G7. That might even run into some Queen G4 check, but the same idea with Bishop C6 might be as effective as well, because after King G7, the fork issue with the knight check is still there.
Gosh. Yeah. Death has descended upon the Black troops here. Everything is falling. Abbasov still trying, hoping against hope for a miracle, but miracles do not happen when Fabiano Caruana has 15 minutes on his clock in a +7 position. And again, you have to win this if you're Nijat Abbasov. He lost the first game. Fabiano Caruana, on the strength of a very unconventional opening, crushing Nijat Abbasov in a Trumpowski, and now coasting to victory in style. You're pointing out knight d7, knight b6. That is the fastest way to end the game.
Yeah, it looks very tempting just to fork things. It isn't even obvious where Black eyes the queen, but also attacks the bishop, and then bishop will be captured with a check on d5. All right, you still have the move bishop f7, falling back, which leads to a catastrophic endgame. But Fabi might not even want this. He might feel that, come on, knight d7 check, king e7, queen f5, isn't it that? Game over on the spot. Is there a way to defend the f6 pawn?
Oh, yeah, that knight on d7, it covers the f8 square. You're right, queen f5 is the best move, and queen f5 might force immediate resignation. This might be the final move of the World Cup, queen h5 to f5, if Fabi picks up the pawn along the way.
Yeah, everything just wins. Black is completely doomed. Fabiano captures the pawn h6, keeps things simple. It's over.
Time to resign. And we expect Abbasov to extend his hand in resignation. There is nothing left to play for. The only move here is rook f8, and that simply gives up the exchange and allows White to trade the queens. Abbasov will make the ceremonial final couple of moves. Queen g7 check, I think, is the most clinical way to finish things off. And there it is, resignation. Queen h6 to g7, the final move of the 2023 World Cup, as Fabiano Caruana claims third place on a comeback victory over the hometown hero, Nijat Abbasov, whose run at the World Cup deserves nothing but the highest praise.
Yeah, I believe that all four players should be extremely happy with their performance. Magnus Carlsen qualifying directly for the candidates tournament, playing an insane event, forcing Magnus Carlsen to the tiebreaks. And that first game was incredibly intense. I do believe that we will have chance to get interviews and we might be able to analyze that game. It was the deciding game of the World Cup, and Magnus Carlsen takes the trophy.
The World Cup is in the books. We congratulate Magnus Carlsen for his victory, Praggnanandhaa for a second place finish, bronze medal claimed by Fabiano Caruana. The World Cup might be over, but our coverage is not. We will indeed try to get Fabiano Caruana on for an interview. We have plenty of chess left to analyze. We had an exciting 2 hours of action that we will unpack for you. But we're going to set anywhere you will not want to miss our debrief, our postmortem, and our interview with some players who turned in an incredible performance over the last month. You're watching the 2023 World Cup. Magnus Carlsen is officially the winner, and we will return with more postmortem analysis and an interview on the other side of this break.
So now we're going to try the Airthings memory test. 2 years ago in 2021, I tested Magnus's memory by setting up a bunch of famous positions and seeing whether he could recognize them.
Okay, this is the 24th game from Seville, obviously.
Now we're going to do the same, but with an added twist. We're not even going to be able to see which pieces are which. Every piece will be represented by an Airthings device instead. So let's see how Magnus gets on.
If I'm going to go piece by piece, I'm hoping that this is a king and these are pawns and that this is a bishop. And hopefully queen h6 should be mated too.
2016, right?
Yes.
Carlsen against Karyakin.
So this test is called Has Magnus Been Following the World Championship? Ding is white against Nepomniachtchi, and here he could have taken the rook with the queen. Eventually, queen goes back here, king to d2, queen b2, and eventually the king is running away. Ding should have found us then.
Is this any more difficult for you?
No, not really. The games are too famous, that's the problem. This has to be Kasparov Topalov from 99 dinars.
What's
Maybe like it's just the structure on the queen side.
nice?
So this one is one of my happier early chess memories. It's from the World Youth Championship under 14. I'm playing black in the first round against future Grandmaster Jon Hammer. That's the king over there. This and this checkmate. So few pieces, but it's definitely a game I've seen, yeah? Almost.
It's. I don't want to give it away, but you will have. That's the clue. You will have seen it.
I'm not sure I've actually seen this.
Okay. In that case, I apologise. It's from the Queen's Gambit TV show when Beth plays, what's his name, Towns in her first ever tournament.
Oh.
So and this is a rook, and it's trapped now because there's a knight on d4 and a king on d2.
Ah. Yeah. I remember that sequence from the series now, but like I wasn't even close, to be honest.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to the 2023 World Cup. And I say this with the most bittersweet of emotions. The 2023 World Cup is in the rapid playoff, and Fabiano Caruana takes third place with a 2-0 victory over Nijat Abbasov. Peter, we said it at the start. You couldn't script it any better. After yesterday's day of action, we knew that today was going to come down to the wire, and it had. Can you believe that this tournament took a month? And can you believe that we're sitting here talking with no more World Cup games left to play?
Exactly. We have seen so much roller coasters. We have seen so much dramas, insane fight by the players. I feel like I'm already missing that the tournament is over. But on the other hand, we have to congratulate the winner, Magnus Carlsen, once again for his fantastic performance. And today, the favorites make it look like easy, but I guess if we will have them on the interview, they will explain that it was everything else than easy. Just when the score looks like this, then you tend to forget what an intense battle it was.
Without question. How many turnarounds that game has. One of the many skills that Pragnananda showed throughout this tournament is an ability to put serious opening pressure on almost everybody. And today was no exception. He got that advantage he was looking for out of the opening. He got a serious attack, and really one move stood between him and a long-term advantage in the middle game. Had he played knight f3 rather than knight f5, we might have been having a different conversation right now. He should hold his head up very high. Second place in the World Cup at 18 years old. The ability to challenge and confront the strongest players in the world again and again. He beat Hikaru Nakamura. He defeated Fabi. He defeated many other top GMs. And this might inaugurate what is sure to be a decades-long and illustrious chess career. That's one of the most interesting things, Peter, about the World Cup, the fact that we can watch a lot of these young players emerge as serious forces to be reckoned with for literally decades to come.
Yes, and also they are inspiring each other. We have seen, and we talked about this in our broadcast, that Gukesh entering top 10, reaching world number 7 position. This definitely kind of inspires Prague that, come on, Gukesh has done it. I also want to do it. And these young players are just, getting more and more energy from each other.
That's absolutely true. It takes a village, and everybody plays a part in propelling these young talents forward. And speaking of talents, we have, as promised, our third place finisher in the 2023 World Cup, Grandmaster and Fabiano Caruana, in the studio to share his thoughts on this incredibly grueling event and a sparkling performance. Fabi, congratulations. Thank you for joining us. We know you're probably completely out of energy, Abbasov.
Oh, yeah, thanks for having me. I am kind of out of energy, but I'm also pretty happy and relieved. It's been 1 month exactly that I've been here, and yeah, it's been a tough road. I mean, every match was tough, and every match was stressful, and even the early matches I felt were kind of more stressful because I was just settling in to the tournament. But yeah, it's also a tough finish. I mean, I got a great deal of luck to even be alive in this match yesterday, and to be playing a tiebreak today. So today was very smooth. And the funny thing was, so he decided to play the Trumpowski in the first game, which was a surprise because he never plays the Trumpowski. But my first round opponent, Michel Lishvili, plays the Trumpowski. And so for the first round, like literally the first thing that I looked at with my second was knight c6 on second move against the Trumpowski. And I didn't get a chance to play it until the very, very last day. So I thought that was kind of funny that that after like 1 month and all the like matches and all the preparation I did for all the matches, I managed to spring this little surprise, which is actually a very decent move.
Yeah, wow. First of all, congratulations, Fabiano, for this sensational comeback and third place qualification for the candidates. This energy after that catastrophic loss, everybody, the whole chess world was really worried for you. It seemed like you ran out of energy, and then this incredible power performance.
Yeah, I had some friends telling me to pull myself together, which was what I needed to hear, I think, because of course I was definitely in bad mental shape leading up to that game, and yeah, it was I mean, okay, he played a good game. I don't want to take credit away, but of course my mind was all over the place, and it showed in my play. And even despite the blunder, like I wasn't playing well, despite Queen B4, even if I hadn't blundered that move. So yeah, I could tell that I just wasn't in the right headspace. And then suddenly for the second game, I started to like I kind of motivated myself a bit, and I started to feel a lot better. I said, okay, I'm to like hold back or anything. I just need to kind of go for it, and it's going to be potentially my last game of the World Cup. So I managed to get my mind right for that game. And of course, I did have some luck that the opening went very well. He fell into basically what I wanted. He fell into what's kind of an opening trap with this Queen E7 move. And although I think that his opening choice may be something he'll regret, because he suddenly switched from something that he had been playing the entire tournament and prepared pretty well, and he played against Magnus, for example, and then he switched his opening into something that he wasn't too familiar with. It seemed so. So okay, I guess we all have some regrets in this event.
Game was one of the finest technical displays that we saw in the World Cup. When you transitioned into the 2 rook and 3 versus rook bishop and 3 endgame, what was your approximate assessment of your winning chances? Were you confident that the trend of the game was in your favor? Was it kind of a 50-50 situation? What was going through your mind when the pawns on the queen side were liquidated?
I think it was close to 50-50 in my mind. And I guess in reality, it probably is a draw, but it's kind of concrete. It looks like black needs to get counterplay quickly before I get my king to the king side and play h3. And that was sort of my feeling during the game, that if I manage to get my king to f2, then probably slowly I'll win this. And I had this alternative, but I didn't want to dwell on it too much, to play a3 to keep the a pawns on the board. And I calculated that for a bit, but then I thought he puts his rook on a5, and I didn't see how to make progress. Let's say I made a judgment call, which was, I'm not 100% sure I'm going to win this, or even like 70 or 80% sure, but the other one I felt like I probably wouldn't win. That was my feeling, which might have been wrong. It's hard to say, of course. Basically, in hindsight, of course, you might either look like a genius or like an idiot with these decisions, but it was sort of a decision I took in the moment, and it worked out.
Fabi, yes, we were completely stunned. Want to share with us some of your key moments in that end game? Then we would be very happy to make that happen.
Yeah, I think that bishop b5 was a very serious mistake. I actually blundered bishop d7. If we go like way earlier in the game, and so when I played bishop b5, suddenly I see that he plays knight e3, bishop d7. And then I was like, I've ruined all my winning chances. And while he was thinking, I saw this rook e1, so I was able to kind of compose myself and play it very quickly when he played this. But I had completely missed this move bishop d7 when I played bishop b5. So it's very lucky I have rook e1 here. Then I thought that his move dc3 was a tremendous mistake, because if he plays, for example, bishop to e6 or bishop f5, I don't know if it matters too much. I need to take on c6, and I don't get the bind that I get in the game. So let's say take, rook takes, rook d4, rook c3, king b2, and rook to c7, or rook to e3. I'm not sure if it matters too much. Like, of course, I have decent winning chances here, but it's probably closer to a draw. That was my feeling. While after dc3, I felt like I'm probably borderline winning. That was just my instinctive feeling, because my rook on d6 is so it's just suffocating his position. He can't break free. He only heard that after from my second, that rook d5 and rook c5 is probably just crushing. And then yeah, at this critical moment was a3. It was a very critical decision, and I don't know if I took the right one. Like if I play a3, bishop d5, I spend maybe like 10 minutes calculating this, rook d8, rook b7, because my rook on d6 has to go, it can't stay there. So rook c3, rook b5, I think is completely forced. And rook a8, rook a5. And I didn't really see what I'm doing here. His rook is ideally placed there. If the rook is on b6, then eventually I kick it off with like a4, a5. But on a5, it both defends and attacks, and like I can't get my king into the game in any meaningful way. So I have to maybe play rook b8, rook b4, but I even wasn't sure about rook b5. So this is why I didn't go for this, although maybe it's winning. It's, of course, very complicated endgame, which is on the borderline of losing for black, but if it's a draw, it might be an easy one to hold. once we traded all the pawns that he let my king get to f2. I was very relieved because I thought I'm not really coordinated. And okay, I kind of know a bit more about this endgame now because I checked it, but like at some point probably g4 was holding, like after probably king c3 or.
Fabi, just one little question, because while we were watching the game, was our feeling correct, or how did you sense this moment?
I was a bit surprised, but I thought I can probably play rook f2 here. It was my plan. And then king c2, king d2. But yeah, my king is, like, I'm not coordinating so easily. On the other hand, I felt like he either goes for a pawn break or slowly I'll get my king there. So I was kind of worried that he would go for something like h5 here and try to get counterplay with g4. It's hard to say, of course. It's probably a draw. But from a practical point of view, it's probably 50-50. I mean, it's a very, very difficult endgame to assess, I have to say.
Uh-huh. Around the point that you intuited the correct plan of h4 and then pushing your f-pawn up, was it at the moment you played king g3, or did you have